All of us need rest, and Jesus promises to give us the rest that we need when we connect ourselves to Him. Jesus becomes our burden bearer. Some situations in life are just too difficult for us to handle on our own, but nothing is too great for Him. We're going to talk about that and so much more on today's episode of Afterwords with Pastor Adam. All right. Well, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Afterwards with Pastor Adam. Today, we welcome a dear friend of mine, Brother Jeff Minton. It's great to have you with us. It's great to have you back in church with us.
Yeah, and it's an honor to be here. I got to listen to a little bit of the podcast earlier today, so that was a lot of fun. And like I told you off camera, so to speak, you and Adrian need to do that more. That was so. It was. I love the sort of the free flowing. It was just like listening in on a conversation.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It didn't seem scripted at all.
Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah, and even though she wasn't a fan at first,
No,
I think she got into the flow there. So
she did.
that was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to having her back, and already planning a few things in the future. And if things work out the way I think they might, she may be back with me next week,
Nice.
along with someone else. So stay tuned for more of that. But before we get too far into this today, I just want to take a second and thank you for, I mean, all the years. I was thinking today of how long you and I have been friends, and at, I'm thinking, if my math is correct, I can account for 10 years.
Yeah. 2011 is what I'm thinking.
Okay.
So
I-
what would that be? 13 years.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm thinking, like I said, I could account for 10. Those pandemic years get a little foggy
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
I lost some time in there.
I
But-
want to say when we first met. Now I don't know if this was the first time, but I think it was on an Emmaus walk, and you did a talk.
It was.
And I think you shared your story.
Yeah.
And I remember being devastated by the story, but rejoicing over the
Right.
God's plan for that.
Yeah.
You know.
And I would have never thought then
Yeah.
that I would be here today. And
Yeah.
and again, as we were walking around the church just a few minutes ago, and
Yeah.
and I was showing you the building and the layout and everything that God is doing. I mean, He's just a big God.
Yeah, absolutely. God is
And-
big. I had a friend who was an old, youth pastor, and his pat reply to everything was, "God is big,"
He's big.
and that's so true.
Yeah.
And so, if
Well-
you're listening out there, Mr. Mullins, we're still quoting.
We're still quoting him, huh? Yeah, for sure. And so I was thinking today, I thought, well, I can go back for 10 years and I can account for how long Jeff Minton has been in my life.
Yeah.
And I knew that we had met on an Emmaus walk, and there has been just several instances in my life where Jeff pops in.
Yeah.
And you're always a thought of mine. I see you from time to time on we talked on the news just here and there from time to time, talking about your pizza ministry, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But the thank you comes from just, I know that I have the support of you and your lovely wife Michelle.
Yeah.
I know that you guys you support the ministry that my wife Adrian and I are called to.
Yeah.
And
cheer for you.
yeah, and we should be doing that for every
Yeah,
every believer,
absolutely,
you
yeah,
know? It's
absolutely.
not us for no more. I
Yeah.
need to be cheering
Yeah,
on what
yeah.
you're doing, and again, you support us. But I was thinking back today of our very first service here. You and your wife were
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
We opened the doors for the very first time,
Yeah.
and it was nowhere near
No.
what it is today. And I looked out, and there's Jeff, and there's Michelle, and there's our brother Donnie Peacher,
Yep.
and several others from the Emmaus community. They're here, and they're supporting us. And it was just that's the kind of stuff that just
Yeah.
pushes you to just keep going and
Yeah.
do good and be effective for the kingdom of God.
Yeah, and I think, thinking back on that, and it blew me away that it was 7 years. I thought, was it like 5 years or something? But,
Yeah.
yeah, man, time just, you're
It
right.
does.
We lost
We
two and a
lost
half,
some
3
time there.
years, in the pandemic era. But it was the thing that was beautiful about that day was not only the attendance, that was amazing,
Yeah.
but was uh, the place had a look of like everything you have to do that last week before you open.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with that, like
It was.
on the retail side and on the church side,
Yeah.
And so it was, but it all came together. It just
Yeah.
always comes together.
It does.
Holy Spirit, you guys talked about it in, uh, the one that I watched. Well, both actually, but it was, you guys were right on. Like if the Holy Spirit's preceding you,
Right.
that it all. I mean, okay, well, we just didn't need 90 chairs, we got 70 or whatever
Right.
that worry was at that time,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I remember going back to those early days of starting Salem Community Church. My wife, Sunday mornings about 10 o'clock, our service is at 10:30. About 10 o'clock, my wife would start pacing the floor. And she would always say, I just know we're not going to have enough chairs this week.
Yeah,
And she used to be so worried about where we were going to put everybody.
right.
And,
Yeah.
God always had room for him.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so, I think back to that first service, and I'll tell you, January of this year, just last month, I got a notification from Facebook about a memory from 7 years ago. And when I clicked on that memory to watch it, you had posted something and had tagged me in it and had tagged the church. And it was after our very first service. I don't know when you posted it. It was somewhere in that timeline. But you went home and at some point in that day, you had made a post about something that my wife had said. And I had to go back and double check with Adrian to make sure I got the story right because it has been 7 years
Yeah.
and there's been
Right.
some foggy days in between.
Right.
But you went home and you made a Facebook post and you said, "Great service, amazing to see what God is doing at Salem Community Church." And you said, and this just blew me away. You said, "May God bless your square in the sand." And I had to go back and I had to ask Adrian. I said, "Now, I remember talking about the square in the
Yeah.
sand, and what
Yeah.
was that?" And she reminded me. She said, "Well, she had seen something or read something about this church in Africa where they didn't have a building. And for that first service, she stood up and she told everybody, she said, look, the building's not fancy. We don't have all of the things that the mega churches or the campuses have or this and that. But what we have, God has given us." And she said, she was talking about these missionaries in Africa, and they would come together with just brothers and sisters in Christ, and they would take a stick and they would make a square sketch, like just sketch it out in the dirt.
Mm-hmm.
And all these believers would get in this square and they would sit and they would say, "This is our church."
Yeah.
No roof over the head, no walls. It was just a group of believers in a plot in the sand.
Yeah.
And you said, "May God bless your square in the sand," and He has. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that hit me, man. I got a little weepy there on that one.
Yeah.
I remember that story. I don't know if I don't remember necessarily doing that, but I definitely re-saw that post. That came in this week, maybe.
it was. And
I think I saw
that's just
that.
God's timing because I had talked to you last week about coming,
Right.
and it wasn't too long after I saw that post,
Yeah.
and I thought, that's
Yep.
just God reminding me
Yep.
that Jeff is supposed to be here.
Yep.
And it just worked out where, again, no coincidences with God, but the day that we film is the day you're off.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it worked out.
Yep.
But again, just thank you for supporting
Well,
us and all
I
that we
mean,
do here.
it's an honor not only to be here, but it's always an honor to be, in the stands watching God do big
something.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always felt like that. It's when you can sit back and look at God blessing someone else, you should be excited about
Yeah,
that because
absolutely.
if you see God, if I see God blessing you, then I know God's in the neighborhood,
Yeah.
and I should be celebrating that because I may be next.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing,
Yeah.
and we've been lucky enough to see, and you guys talked about it, and this is not anything new to a believer, but we get to experience the highest of highs and sometimes the lowest
Man.
of lows.
Yeah.
And certainly the pandemic that
We don't want to do that again.
yeah, no, that, I mean, I don't know what else to say, but that sucked.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Guys.
Yeah. That's adequate.
Yeah. I mean,
I think everybody feels that way across the board. Yeah.
Sometimes it just is what it is,
Yeah.
But, like 9/11 and so many things that we've seen in our lifetime, God was in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doing big things.
Yeah.
So.
And and it just goes to show that everything does work out for the good of those who love him.
Yeah.
And, it's hard to deny that when you
Right.
have seen it at work so many times. I want to talk, Jeff, just if, our viewers online and those who are listening, they don't know you like I know you, or maybe some do.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, some of them do.
Some of them do. But I think about your story, and you've got a story. Everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And I'm someone who likes to share a platform because I have a story, and if someone wouldn't have given me a microphone and an opportunity to share it, nobody would have ever heard it.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that I have gone through the things I've gone through in life for God to waste my story.
Yeah.
My pain is my pulpit, and my mess is my ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen to that.
And you have a story, and we were on an Emmaus walk, and I heard your story. But I heard a snippet because we're timed. We have a short window of opportunity to make some bullet points,
Mhm.
and that's about it. And so, I would like to go back. I'd like to go back, and I would like to, if I may, just ask you what was the day like? What was the day like that you had an encounter with Christ and you was like, okay, I need him in my life? Or had you always had him? Just tell us a little bit about your upbringing in your life and what that was like, and what did you go through to get Jeff to where he is today?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question that I've experienced both of those things.
Okay.
And so we might get into some arm wrestling or whatever if we get into faith and once and grace and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
We won't go there. First of all, I'm a recovering Baptist,
Okay.
so I'd like to start there. But anyway, I was raised in the church, and at 13, an old fire and brimstone minister who happened to be my grandfather preached a sermon. I can't tell you what that sermon was.
Yeah.
But there was a little church, much like that fledgling little church that we were here together 7 years ago. And he was holding what they used to do in the old days, a revival. That's a crazy concept.
I don't hear much about those anymore.
No, you don't. And it had a little handmade pulpit, and it had a little handmade, what we called in the old days, a mourner's bench. And it was about 4 feet. And there was a little lady sitting about second from the front. And my grandfather was beloved, okay?
Yeah.
He was, a minister for 40 years almost. And, he was beloved. And so he was, giving you 3 chords and the truth. And, it was weighing on me as 13 years old or whatever about that. And she kept turning around looking at me, and I just kept lowering my head. It's like, and if anybody that's been there, we talk about this church talk or church speak, like there's a convicting spirit and all of the stuff that you hear, maybe not so much anymore in some churches, but she just kept looking at me, and I'll try not to get emotional.
No.
But her name was Ada, and she started walking towards me, and I was like, oh, crap.
Right.
Here she comes. And she asked me that question, if you died tonight, where do you know?
Yeah.
Where would you go? And I didn't know the answer to that. And I remember taking a step out. I was sitting on the end, and I almost knocked her down, and running,
Yeah.
literally running and fell down in front of my grandfather. And then I remember him saying, two things that came to my head before the uh, giving my life to God was I heard him say, "This is my little grandson. Come and pray."
Yeah.
And something that my dad always, he was a warrior, but in a good way. And he
Yeah.
always said that, like, a lot of times when people would come to the altar, that they would look up like they're expecting more. So in my head,
Yeah.
I just kept my head down,
Right.
you know. And so, I was saved that night, and that's how it started. Uh, Something I saw pictures of that you guys have done, and I assume you still do. But I was baptized in an old creek,
Yeah.
and the whole 9 yards. However, it
Yeah.
was in January, which I really feel like that they needed to rethink that idea.
Hey,
There
we
was
got to get you while you're in the mood,
yeah,
no matter the
yeah.
month. Yeah.
So anyway, that's how it started, and then I sort of fell away from the church when I was 19, and for about 10 or 11 years, I was in the life.
Yeah.
And I often, and you've probably heard part of that story
Yeah.
in my Emmaus talk, about the only thing we weren't doing was heroin and killing people.
Yeah.
And then, you have one of those reawakenings, and it started with Michelle, my exactly my second wife, and we began to go to church again,
Praise
and
God.
we spent some time at my old home church, but it was struggling at that time, and we were seeking, we didn't, it wasn't anything that was filling us up like
Right.
we felt like we should. And so we began to search a little bit, and there was some stuff that happened, which began to be the charity that, the Clean Socks Hope charity.
Yeah.
Um, Basically, we were trying to get that started, and we had a falling away with some folks there at my old church.
Yeah.
And we, a lot of times, maybe a year or so, we didn't go at all. And then I remember her getting up one Sunday and saying, "We can't keep doing this." Shelley did, and I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "We're not just going to sit here and not go.
Yeah.
We got to find something." And so we started our search. Now we ended up at Northside, which, like any big church, you can be a visitor and be invisible.
Right.
But that wasn't necessarily in our wheelhouse, or at least mine. Um, I'm one of those folks that, if I'm in, I'm all in.
Yeah.
And something that you guys talked about, I want to share this just real quick. But you guys talked about, your answer to the call,
Yeah.
and that's a lifetime. And I think there's a lot of folks out there that don't understand, if you commit to God and you commit to a ministry or a mission, it's a lifetime gig. I mean,
Yeah.
you're in it until you die.
Yeah.
And our example of that is certainly Jesus, who picked up the cross, and, he could have quit halfway through that and said, "No, this
Yeah.
is hard. I'm not going
Right. Yeah. I mean,
to."
at any time he could have said,
Right. Yeah.
I'm just not feeling it today.
Right. It's that, that old, remember the old hymn, 10,000 angels? He could
Yeah.
have called
Called.
10,000 angels.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was kind of how it started. And that began, to your original question, that began the second part of my life.
Yeah.
There was a lot of stuff that happened in between. While I was in the life, I opened a Domino's, and in 1 month, I lost my house, my business, my wife, my kids, and I owed the IRS $100,000. So that's how God got me back to square one.
Yeah.
Saying, "Okay, now that you've tried it your way, you want to
Yeah.
try it mine." Now it took me several years to get there, but that was the
Yeah.
linchpin. But what happened was, I got a job in Wheeling, West Virginia, with a franchise friend of mine, and we opened a store in St. Clairsville, Ohio. And a little Italian girl came in and asked for a job, and we've been hanging out ever since. That was 33 years ago. So
Praise God.
yeah, so that's kind of how that worked. But yeah, um, I've lived a lifetime in a
In a
decade
short
or
time,
two.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so it's crazy how God's will does things like that. And I have something I want to read.
Oh, you go ahead.
This is to the point of um, you talking about how we were talking about God doesn't do random. So we got there, and so this is my little student Bible that I've had for 25 years.
Yep.
A lot of my brothers,
It's got some miles on it.
yeah, a lot of my brothers make fun of it because it's so pitiful.
No.
But it's like, hey man, this is the
Tried
Bible I
and
read
true.
every day.
Yeah.
So anyway, and I don't know who this guy is, and I hope I don't get in trouble. But this gentleman's name is Addison Leach, and it's got little highlights in here, and it just says God's will, man's will, and then the quote is, "When the will of God crosses the will of man, somebody has to die."
Yeah.
Now, how heavy is that?
That's heavy.
That is heavy. I
Yeah.
love that. I love that quote.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's the time that I was in the life and doing the things that I shouldn't be doing and all of that stuff, I knew better.
Yeah.
I knew the calling was there. I didn't know what it was.
Mhm.
I didn't know how it would look.
Yeah.
And certainly in my head is almost never the way it is in God's head.
No. Hardly ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, I kiddingly say, I've been praying for many years to be able to do a work for God every day.
Yeah.
And what I should have been doing is praying that prayer and asking for a salary to go along with it.
Yeah.
Because we spent many, many years, I was a volunteer and Shelley worked, that
Yeah.
was the truth.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Well, so going back, you were talking about that grandpa who preached that sermon.
Yeah.
And the conversation of, if you were to die tonight, do you know where you would go?
Right.
Yeah, that's a heavy question.
Yeah.
And for me, I think everybody has that moment of, okay, boy, that was a question that just hit me different than
Right.
it's ever hit me before,
Right.
or anything I've ever heard. For me, I was in a different place. I wasn't in a church. You know the story. I was in an upstairs recreation room in a county jail. And, for you, God had to get you in front of your grandpa.
Yeah.
And God had to speak that word to you. For me, God had to get me in front of an old man with no teeth and a long beard who was hell, fire, and brimstone.
Yeah.
And when he did that altar call, I had no idea how I got up out of my chair and got in front of him, but I did.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he said, "What do you want, young man?" And I told him, I said, "I think I need Jesus." And he put both of his hands on my shoulders. And he told me, he said, "Boy," he said, "if you're living your life like there's not a God," he said, "in the end, you better hope you're right." And I said, "I can't be sure of that."
Yeah.
And he said, "You need Jesus."
Yeah.
And
That's pretty heavy.
yeah, yeah. And I was like, everything else I've done in my life up until that point, I have been wrong.
Yeah.
And I thought,
how's that working for you?
yeah, I thought eternity is not something that I want to base off my knowledge and off of my ability or what I know, because what my decisions and everything that I knew had led me to where I was.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's powerful what God will do to get your attention and get your heart.
Yep.
I'm so thankful that He doesn't stop
Right.
when we stop.
Right.
Yeah,
isn't it amazing? We were talking about this at Bros this past Wednesday morning, and it's one of those things where I think sometimes and I get it. We're old enough and we've lived long enough to understand that the world is remarkably different than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And so the enemy comes at us with all these new gizmos,
Yeah.
and not that anything out there is necessarily good or bad, but it's just the way we gather information now is totally different than it was
Years ago.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, even, 15 years ago, whatever. And I think what we don't realize a lot of times is we get lost in that noise and forget that he is there either waiting or wanting or urging or whatever that looks like for us to
Yeah.
come. And he is our biggest cheerleader. We're talking about that.
Yeah.
He's cheering for us. He
Nope.
wants us to
Yeah.
succeed.
Nobody wants you to succeed more than God.
Oh, right.
And it breaks my heart when I hear people say, God is mad at me.
Yeah.
God is punishing
Yeah.
me. God, and I
Yeah.
just want to
Yeah,
tell them, I'm like,
no.
no, you may feel like that,
Yeah.
but that's a lie straight from the devil.
Yes.
God loves you.
Yeah.
God is your biggest cheerleader.
Yep.
You may be surrounded by people who love you, but you will not find a bigger fan of
Right.
yours than God.
Yeah. And that's what we don't understand.
Oh, you're
Thanks. Talk with my hands. Can
You're
you
okay.
tell?
I do too. That's why I had to get one that was out of the way.
But we don't understand that like even in the throes of addiction or whatever that looks like, he is begging, cheering, like you can
Yeah.
be. I mean, what's his name? Stephen. No, the guy that we had over at our place at the old 8th Street a few times, the singer, Stephen McWhorter. He
Oh,
talks
yeah.
about that,
Yeah.
his being raised in the church, and then in the throes of the addiction, he wakes up and throws everything away, and
Yeah.
because he had a one-on-one encounter with God. When you have an encounter with the resurrected Christ, then that things have to change. You
Yeah.
know, and certainly you guys were talking about Paul. We're reading. We went through Acts and we're reading Romans now, and it's just like,
Yeah.
he just had that thing happen to him too, and this is someone he didn't know personally, but yet he had an encounter with the resurrected Christ.
Yeah.
Now that changes people,
It
and
does.
it's not any different today than it was
No.
when Paul was on that road to Damascus.
He's still changing people.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
and in a great way.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. If I wasn't changed, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And if you
No,
wasn't
that's
changed,
true.
you wouldn't be here.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely it.
Yeah.
Dave Stone said it probably as good as I've ever heard. The greatest evidence of God is a changed heart.
right. Can't deny it.
I mean, that's what an amazing thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's this big time stuff there.
Man, just you got my wheels turning.
Yeah.
And very seldom am I ever at like, where am I gonna go next? I would like to, and we're gonna get into, and we're gonna talk a little bit about we're gonna talk a little bit more about your story in just a few minutes.
Sure.
And we'll get into your service ministry too, because I want to talk about that. But you brought up Stephen.
Yeah.
And man, for anybody who has never listened to his stuff,
Yeah. You
Stephen
need to.
McWhorter on you can find him on YouTube.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you where I heard from him first. You.
Yeah.
13 years ago, 10 years ago,
Yeah.
whatever it was.
Yeah.
When you and I were standing having a conversation, you said, "Hey, have you ever heard of this guy Stephen?"
Yeah.
And I said, "I know, I
Yeah.
hadn't heard." And at that time, who was Stephen?
Right. He was in Iron Bell.
Right.
At that point. Yeah.
So you had given me an Iron Bell CD.
Yeah.
That you had went to a church in Louisville, and I
Yep.
guess they were there, or maybe they were the worship band at
Yep.
that place. And you had given me that CD, and my wife can attest to this. We rocked that CD
Oh,
all
yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
And I had a company car that had a CD player in it, and
Yep.
my company I worked for, they called me up and said, "Hey, it's time to switch your car out. Come and bring that car back to Missouri." So I did. I got my new vehicle and was driving it home, and I got almost home, and I thought, I left that CD in the CD player
Oh,
of
no.
my company car, and it had been traded in, and I couldn't. And so I actually reached out to Stephen.
Yeah.
I sent him a message on Facebook, and I asked him, I said, "Is there any place that I can pick up this old Iron Bell music?"
Yeah.
And he told me, he said, "Man," he said, "you might be able to find some of that old stuff from the church on YouTube." He said, "But I don't think we have any more of those CDs or
Yeah.
anything like
Right.
that." So, um, my loss. But his stuff now is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. You might be able to find it like on. Do you have an iPhone?
No.
Okay. A lot of times Apple Music will have those old albums like that.
Yeah.
So you can get it.
I had to.
You can't get it as a CD, but you can get it. The audio of it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
But I was devastated by
Yeah.
leaving that CD behind. But
Yeah, he was. I mean, his story is a great one. We had him at the the A Street, the Robinson Nugent building a couple times.
Yeah.
And it was just amazing.
Yeah.
He just
great,
we get in trouble for it
great
being
singer.
too loud in there, and it's like, well, it's just him and a guitar. It's not my fault. He can sing that loud.
Yeah. What do you do? Tell him to
Right.
cut his wind
He's
off.
praising God, man. Get off my back.
Right.
Kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh well, Jeff, if you don't mind, let me take you back a few years.
Okay. I'm not sure I'll remember, but
Okay. You will.
all right.
You will. You told me a story one time about some family, and you know, I'll just ask you, because we've talked about this many times, and you said, when it comes to ministering to people, they have something about church. Sometimes people get burnt in church or whatever the case may be. They have church hurt, and they are just totally turned off
Yeah.
by it.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of people that think, I'm not going to that. They'll brainwash you. They'll do this. They'll
Yeah.
do that. And then we hear, you said it best one time. You said, how there's been times when you've ministered to people and they're like, "Oh, what do you want me to do? Drink the Kool-Aid," and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But for you,
Yeah.
that hits different.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, we
Will
lost.
you will you share?
Sure. We lost my aunt and my uncle and my cousin, and two cousins that we'd never met, and in Jonestown.
Yeah.
And now this was in a time in the 70s that nothing like this had ever happened.
Right.
So there was, and you talk about being in a different era. It just was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the weird thing was we had actually, on one of our trips, like they hooked up with Jim Jones, my aunt, and uncle lived in Indianapolis, and I actually had another aunt and uncle. I don't know if the ones that we lost lived in Indianapolis then, but anyway, it doesn't matter. They hooked up with Jim Jones when he was in Indianapolis.
Okay.
Followed him to California,
Yeah.
and we were on vacation, actually stopped in where they were, my aunt and uncle, and hung out with them, spent the night with them, and they took us to the church in Redwood that he was building. And so I actually toured that church as a young kid. And then they followed him to South America to what became
Jonestown.
Guyana.
Guyana.
Yeah, Jonestown. And so when people say, you drank the Kool-Aid, I've heard it from the pulpit. I've heard it from
Yeah.
the Emmaus community. I mean, a lot
Right.
I heard it on, I think it was Blue Bloods or something a week ago,
Yeah.
like a rerun of Blue Bloods. So for us, that hits like completely different. And, the crazy thing about it was my grandfather that I was saved under his preaching. I have his Bible, by the way, which precious
Right.
thing. But he begged them not to go.
Yeah.
He
He saw
he
he saw the writing on the wall. Huh?
Well, I tell you what he said, and we were, around and we were incredibly close to him. He said, "The Holy Spirit is telling me you guys don't need to go. He's of the devil." He said this.
Wow.
This man is
Had discernment.
yeah. This man
had to be the
is
Holy
a
Spirit.
fake, and you need to run as far as you can. And they didn't listen. But the good news is the blessing of that was um, Val and my uncle had two other children that were almost adult. The one was a nurse, went with them, and she realized what was happening the day that they drank the Kool-Aid, and she convinced Jim Jones to. Um, they had two elderly women, and convinced them that they were sick enough that they needed to see a doctor.
Yeah.
And she took them and rescued these two people and herself and got them out of there the day it happened. Now, my other, these were both my cousins, and they were adult cousins, so I didn't know them well. He was pursuing a music career, so he said, "I'm not going to go. I'm just going to go on to California." So that's how it saved. I mean, to
That's
Los Angeles. That's how
yeah.
it saved his life.
Yeah.
So that stuff is pretty raw. And the thing that I remember about it, and I think this is what I said at the Emmaus community, or at the Emmaus Walk, was I'll never, as long as I live, when we had to gather. My grandfather had already passed away, and we had to gather as a family and tell my grandmother that they all died. And I'll never I'll never forget her cry.
Yeah.
It was a wail. It was unlike anything I'd
Yeah.
ever heard.
Yeah.
And certainly, to those out there that have lost a child, I can't imagine what that was like.
No.
She
But
lost
s-
a bunch,
yeah. Yeah.
grandchildren, and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty tough thing.
Yeah.
I often think about what it. You hear stories like that. You don't hear as many of them now anymore. Now, I'm not saying they're not out there.
Oh yeah,
I mean, they're out there. But for me to think, and forgive me if this comes off as sounding like weak-minded to your family, but what I'm thinking in my mind is, how does a person get to a place in their mind and in their heart where they would believe
yeah,
one person so much that they would do that? That they would follow that person
hmm
who- and believe what they're saying to the point of, I mean, I think too that it is just a level of brainwashing,
yeah,
and it's just programming.
yeah,
You know, I, but I,
yeah,
but I mean it. You knew your family.
yeah,
I mean, I'm not saying they were weak minded, but I mean there was probably nothing about them that you would have thought they were different than anybody
yeah,
else.
yeah. And I think you hit on it. I mean, I think it's a charisma,
Yeah.
and you know, probably because of that, I'm fascinated with. I watch a lot of those documentaries,
Yeah.
about the cults and stuff, and um, the survivors say a lot of the same things that
Yeah.
um, Joyce and those that did survive it. My cousins said was, he just had this way, and there was an answer for everything.
Yeah.
And I think something that I've thought about a lot, and actually, you guys, um, listening to the podcast, um, sort of reminded me of it. It's like I think, especially back then, one of the biggest breakthroughs in my life was I was in church many years ago, and frankly, I don't even remember who the pastor was,
Yeah.
who said it, but this was the most life affirming and opened my eyes to this faith walk that we're doing now, especially in I'm older now, but he said that I struggle from this and this and this. He said that from the pulpit.
Yeah.
I had never heard that before. And you guys talked about it, you and
Oh,
Adrian
yeah.
did, the struggles you have as a pastor, as a modern pastor.
Yeah. I
Um,
I think I just told I tell on myself all the time. I think I just told him it's Monday. I just told him yesterday. Hey, your pastor's got problems.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I'm the first one to say I'm
yeah.
not perfect. And yeah.
I think, in that era, we had never seen, I mean, there had been no uh, breakdown of some television evangelist or whoever,
Right.
uh, like we've seen since, but there was no, place of reference.
Right.
So I've done this in my life, and I think we all do, but we put these folks, these pastors up on a pedestal,
Yeah.
you know, and not that they don't deserve our respect. That's not
Right.
what I'm saying, but they do. They don't deserve a replacement for Jesus.
No, absolutely
You
not.
know,
Right.
and the fact that what you mean you struggle with that?
Right.
You know, I don't get it. I don't. How's that work? You know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that was probably the most life affirming thing for my faith walk was understanding. It's like, well, okay, you know,
Yeah.
people have struggles regardless.
Right.
You know, and Satan attacks all of us.
For sure.
Yeah, daily.
Nobody.
It's exempt.
Nobody's exempt.
All right.
And yeah, we talking about the struggles. The struggle is real.
Oh yeah.
And it's for every one of us, and
Yeah.
it's for every day. And yeah, and so we talk about that all the time, just because I don't want anyone to think that I got selected, or God ordained me to be a minister or a pastor because I was perfect,
Right.
because that's not it.
Yeah.
I believe that one of the reasons that, and I don't even know if I should say this, because the moment you start talking about how humble you are, you're not. But you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think
No,
I
get
think
it.
one of the reasons that God continues to use me and will use me is because I try my hardest to seek His will in everything that I do.
Yeah.
And I try to be humble.
Yeah.
I mean, in every way. I'll be
Right.
the first. I try to be the first to admit, because it's a whole lot easier to hear that I've messed up from me than to hear that I've messed up from you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No,
And,
I do.
And so, God loves a humble heart.
Yeah.
But we talk about how at that point in time in the world, we hadn't seen a breakdown of pastors or evangelists or anything like that. We didn't have anything to gauge. Oh my gosh, this is a
Right.
cult. We didn't have any way to gauge that. But one thing I teach here at Salem Community Church is that don't take my word
Yeah.
for it.
Oh yeah. I'm so glad you said that.
Don't take my word for it. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to preach to you on a Sunday morning, and I'm going to share with you my interpretation of what God has given me
Mhm.
this week. I'm going to share it with you. I hope you take notes, and I hope you go home, and I hope it encourages you to get in your Bible
Mhm.
and see if God tells you the same thing. He may not.
Right.
But the Word tells us that we need to put to test the things that we hear. And if they do not align with Him, they're not of Him.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I love that because my dad was famous for saying I've heard him say this to churches, to individuals, that kind of stuff. He's like, bring your Bible to church. We could be reading out of the Chilton's manual, and a lot of these folks wouldn't know any different.
right.
How to
For sure.
rebuild a carburetor wouldn't know any difference if we're reading in Leviticus or something,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And he was famous for that, and that would he just had this tone about it. He was kind of growling about it, you know. He just kind of
Yeah.
you know, that kind of stuff. But it was so true and accurate, and so I think that's something we have to do. I mean, we should be. Not that we don't trust you, but we want to trust what God is trying to tell you that you told us.
Yeah. And two, the Word also tells us that, in these days there will be false prophets, there will be false teachers, there will be people that try to lead you astray. And so you need to put to test what they're telling you. And I mean, I try to tell that to the people. I try to tell that to the church, and I love them. I would never intentionally do anything to mislead anybody.
Right.
But again, all I can give you is my interpretation of what God has given me.
Yeah.
Please go home and consult Him on it.
Yeah.
And get in the Word.
Yeah.
Get in the Word.
Yeah. I'll tell you a funny about my dad. He 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 led the singing, and he was our treasurer, and this is the little church that I grew up in, and he was also a deacon. And so when they would go to the presbytery, our little church was part of an association of General Baptists called Free Union, and so they would have their presbytery meeting. and then they would talk about church business, and then if deacons were coming, to the presbytery to be evaluated, or pastors,
Yeah.
they would, usually what you would do is, like, it's parliamentary rule, if you're scoring at church or scoring at home, and then you would set aside this gentleman, typically, and always in their faith, and he would work in the church, and then after that year he'd come back, and they would quiz him and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, and then allow him to be a pastor or whatever. Well, a lot of times, because a lot of country churches were involved, they bring people in that couldn't read.
Yeah.
There's going to be, a
Gonna be leading a
pastor.
church,
Yeah,
yeah.
leading a church. And Dad would always be, him and Bob Hammond, who was a pastor, good friend, who married my wife and I, Michelle. And they would be against it, and everybody be mad at him. And they were like, "Why are you against this guy? He can't read. He can only tell you what someone else has told him.
Yeah.
He doesn't. There's
Wow.
nothing against him,
Yeah.
but that's the state of churches can get into sometimes. And it's a scary situation when we have to be diligent that we're not allowing these folks in, getting back to the Jim Jones thing. But what he
Yeah.
did was, think of the damage that this man did by
Mm.
being a charismatic leader.
Yeah.
A Satan's spawn, so to speak.
Yeah.
And nothing like that had ever happened.
Right.
And now it's sometimes once a year.
Yeah.
There's some
You hear
horrible-
something about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's horrifying.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean
No.
to get off on a tangent.
No. I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. I wanted to. Yeah. So, when we talk about testing the word and going home and finding out, for yourself what God is telling you.
Yeah.
And I one of the things that drove me to want to start this podcast and the whole idea of Afterwords with Pastor Adam is that we come in after the Sunday sermon and we discuss a little bit about what we talked about. And when I was writing the message for yesterday that we just preached on Sunday, when I was writing that earlier in the week, you came to mind. And for those who are in church, they know what we talked about. And if you're not in church with us and you want to go back and you want to watch that episode, you can find that on YouTube. And you can find it on our Salem Community Church Facebook page. We always live stream there. But we talked about in Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 through 30, where Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you, and all of you who are burdened and weary." And he says, "And you take my yoke on you, and learn from me." He said, "I'm gentle, I'm humble, and if you will take my yoke upon you, you will find rest for your souls." And we talked about that. And one of the big takeaways from yesterday's service was that Jesus tells us that if we will yoke up with him, he will be our burden bearer. And the thing about a yoke is two become one. The power of two is harnessed and
Yeah.
it becomes one.
Right.
And so he lightens the load.
Yeah.
He doesn't say that he's going to eliminate it,
Mhm.
but that it's just going to be lightened. And when I was thinking about that, and when I was writing that this week, you and your ministry and your wife, Michelle, just continued to come to my mind. And I knew I knew God was working this out for you to be a guest. And I was thinking about what you do. And I was thinking, if Christ tells us that we need to take his yoke upon us because it's light, and he alleviates the burden, lightens the load for us, is we as believers, if we are in Christ and we are to emulate him, then what that tells me is that because Christ is a burden bearer for me, I need to help be a burden bearer to other people. And so that doesn't mean I can eliminate your burden,
Right.
but I can come alongside of you and help you through it the best that I can.
And when I think of Jeff,
Lord.
I think of someone who is trying to alleviate the burden that someone else is carrying. And I think of that with Clean Socks Hope, and I think of that with 8th Street Pizza. And I want to just give you the floor for a second and,
Okay.
and tell us a little bit about your ministry and your and what you're doing in your area.
Well, that's actually changed a little bit since we probably talked
Yeah.
last. I can't remember the last time we saw each other in person. But
Been a little
anyway,
bit.
yeah, it's been a minute, and we've both been doing things, but it was weird, and I'll share this to you. And I'm gonna say this, and this may not make any sense, and then I'll come back and make
Okay.
it make sense. But at the end of the pandemic, we were facing a lot of issues. The only reason the charity had been able to survive through the pandemic was the pizza shop.
Yeah.
That was the only way we were sort of keeping the lights on and paying the bills and that kind of stuff.
Now, was this 8th Street Pizza at Breakwater?
Yes.
Okay.
And so we went through like everyone else, we
Yeah.
we were, staying at home and that kind of stuff. Actually, Shelley went to work every day because there was nobody in the office, so she was able to work like really well. And I actually we were going to move down, we're going to move the pizza shop down on Main Street. And so every morning I'd leave when she did, and I would just work there. We had the building ready. We were ready to open that pizza shop there. But we were having trouble with the state, and we were having trouble with our landlord.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, through those, that was 2019 into 2020. So it was about November of 19 into 2020. It was almost a year, and nothing was happening, and we were really struggling. And I obviously had my Bible there, and I was doing a lot of praying, and it was great. I had this great restaurant ready to go, and I couldn't open it, so I was just in my little office,
Right.
and that was my church, and to be
Yeah.
honest with you, because you couldn't go to church.
Yeah.
And so God gave me this message, and the message was what? That was it.
Okay, God, I need a little more than that.
And I was like,
What?
and so I literally, and I'm not exaggerating or
Yeah.
making this up, I wrote that on a piece of paper. What?
What?
What are we going to do now? What are you talking about? You
Yeah.
go through 1,000 different scenarios. So what had happened, it's funny that I didn't mean to do that.
You went right in. Nice segue.
Yeah. Now, see, if I'd have been thinking,
Yeah,
had
you-
I been prideful, I'd have went right with that. Anyway, so because of the pandemic, everybody was freaking out. And so we lost all our income except for 2 people were donating to the cause.
Okay, wow.
So we went from a budget of about $100,000 in our heyday to $200 a month. That's what we were getting, and that was paying a storage unit,
Wow.
and then we were having to come up with the rest of it. So anyway, that was a heavy, heavy burden, and so I just told the landlord after almost a year. I said, "Look, you can sue us. I don't care, but we're out of here."
Yeah.
So we packed up, or we didn't. Not then. I actually got in my car, headed out, and I turned left on 5th Street and ran into the for lease sign at the breakwater.
Okay, yeah.
And
And that was a new building at that time.
yeah,
wasn't it?
and there had been one place in there, and it only lasted 9 months. So it was 9 months old.
Yeah.
And that was about the 10th month. And so I called the thing, and then in June of 2020, we signed a lease, and in August of 2020, we opened. So that's how fast we turned it around. But getting back to the what thing was, there was a great peace in all of this. And so I'm much older now than I was, 17 years ago.
Right.
And so it became a realization that, I'm doing as much ministry out of the pizza shop as I was doing trying to do both. And so we didn't let it go or whatever. We were still doing that. And then we had Linda Pate was our head volunteer, and she was running not only the Christmas store, but she was running the co-op.
Mhm.
Well, she got sick, so we had to postpone a few things, and then she passed away, and I ended up doing her funeral. And so God just kept throwing that what back there. What are we doing now? I was trying to figure that out, and so we realized that maybe our time for that part of the journey has come to an end.
Right.
And then we had a really weird thing happen. Shelley and I had, and this is a long story, sorry about that. We had an opportunity to go to Italy that her mom had paid for years ago. And we were supposed to be there in Italy in 2019 when Italy was the first country that shut the borders. We would
Yeah.
have been there,
Yeah.
and I guess still been there.
You'd have been making pizza in Italy.
Yeah, I could have done that. I could have supported myself.
Yeah.
And she's a nurse, so she could have done it anywhere. So anyway, while we were gone, our rent at the Breakwater had gotten outrageous, and it had really become a burden to us. And so while we were gone, those 2 weeks in Italy, they defaulted us and threw us out.
Yeah.
So when we got back, they said, you have to be out. We got back on a Thursday. They were telling us we had to be out on a Friday. And I said, well, hey, folks, there's no way that's going to happen.
Right.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. You got more stuff than that. Yeah.
So anyway, we talked them into Memorial Day weekend. So we closed that part of the pizza shop. And yes, it's kind of the same deal. I told them, I said, you can sue me if you want to. Well, they did. So that was the first time that that had ever backfired on me. But I mean, I get it. It's just like it is what it is. But we couldn't afford $4,000 a month, for that place and that kind of stuff. And so as all this sort of big round story happens, the last day it was. And you'll know these names: Sandy Yates and Cindy, Jason's wife, Cindy Sparks.
Yeah.
And Shelley and I were loading my truck, and I'll be daggone if Shelley didn't fall out of the back of the truck and break not only her leg but her arm. So for the
she doesn't do anything halfway, does she?
She is all in, man.
Yeah.
And so for 6 months. I took care of her.
Yeah.
And out of the blue, a former Northside guy owned a brewery, and I had thrown out on there, maybe we could do a ghost kitchen, something like that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, they Kim and Richard Ote offered us their kitchen at their brewery and said, hey, just come and if you like it, you can have it. And we'll do rent free for a while and whatever. But they opened up an opportunity for us to reopen that. And then we had a little fun with it. They're called Donham Day Brewery. And if folks dig their Latin or Greek, whatever that is, I think it's whatever.
Yeah.
And so we sort of changed the name to Eighth Day, a play on Donham Day. And so we opened that, and it's kind of like a food truck. I've had to say no to a lot of the stuff that we normally do, but yet I'm making just as much money and paying as much bills doing it just me. And then Shelley comes in for 2 hours on Friday, and it's just us. Now, we've had a mess to clean up, and we're still working on that, but we've never been happier in our life. Yeah. We had all this overhead and all this stuff, and so we came to an agreement that what we needed to do was God was saying, well, this is the end of this journey, and that we're putting you on the next part. So in the middle of all that, so that was the what. Yeah. And we're in a great peace with that.
Yeah, God's given you just that spirit of release about all that.
All of it. And then a crazy thing happened. Jake and Mandy, my son and daughter-in-law, we have a little um, um, had a little grandson. His name's Byron, named after my dad, and we went on vacation. This is during the pandemic or whatever. This is
Yeah.
20. Well, is at the end of the pandemic, I guess. But anyway, this was before all this stuff happened, and they said we're on vacation with it, and our sister-in-law and nieces from Ohio were in, and we were having this great time down at Kentucky Lake, and they handed out pictures and said, "Hey." So anyway, she was pregnant again, but not only was she pregnant again, she was pregnant with triplets.
My goodness.
So we were like, and I'm sorry to say this, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but I just went and there was a bottle of wine in there, and I opened it, and I'm pretty sure I drank the whole thing because it was like,
Yeah.
it was like, this is a wine moment, and I think I'm going to have some.
Yeah.
But anyway, they are such a blessing, and I feel like that I had gotten and you guys talked about this.
Yeah.
I had got so consumed about the charity, the pizza shop, but what God was revealing to me, we can do all of that stuff, but we can do it small. You started in the back of your pickup truck ministering to people one-on-one.
Yeah.
That was your church.
Yeah.
I can't not do that now. I mean,
Right.
I'm much older. I'm moving like a lot slower.
Yeah.
I don't have the stamina, that kind of stuff, but I can still minister to people.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what God was showing us, and we have this great peace. And so we are in the process of dissolving the A Street Pizza LLC, and the charity, doing all the things, the important things that you have to do with that. But we're excited about the ministry to come because we've got these little bitty humans that now are in our lives that have never been.
Yeah.
And then we've been able to be a part of fundraisers. And the cool thing about the brewery, they do a lot of fundraisers for others.
Yeah.
Their big ministry is they donate to Apron Inc., which is helps displaced food service workers that maybe are in an accident, didn't have insurance, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So they're doing really good work, and they're
You'd
allowing.
be surprised how many. Well, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but it's surprising to know how many people are in that industry that don't have insurance and things like that.
Almost everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, almost everybody, unless you're in a corporation, or a manager or whatever.
Yeah.
Because nobody's working full time.
Yeah.
But it allowed us to. Now I can just close the pizza. It's like a food truck. I
Right.
work. I have a set schedule, but the hours are half or a third of what I've been used to working.
Yeah.
And I think health wise and family wise, I get to do the things that I could have never done before.
Yeah.
So again, that was this huge. My life has been 3 or 4 monster events that were catastrophic at the time of
Right.
that it happened, but yet, God has been faithful and steady and perfect in His wisdom. It's
Yeah.
like, all right, we don't want you to die and have a heart attack. You've got these little babies to
Right.
love on, and certainly,
Let me tell you, $4,000 a month they'll give you. It will stress you out.
oh man, and that wasn't even like the half of it. I mean, that was just one part of it.
Right.
So crap, we've got to make $9,000 this week, or we're going to bounce checks, or we're going to make $12,000.
That's a lot of pizza.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
now, granted, the pizza shop was killing it.
Yeah.
But what it's allowed now is like we do about as much in a week as we did in a day at the other place, and I could not be more happy.
Yeah.
And
Less is more sometimes.
the crazy thing is, I mean, you would think a brewery and a pub is not necessarily a churchy place. Since I've been there, and we reopened under this new moniker on October 16th, and we've had the craziest things happen. These the people that are obviously believers, they've just have broken out into Bible studies and stuff like all over the place.
Praise God.
I mean,
Yeah.
and it's funny because when we started the Clean Socks Hole back in the day, we thought we were trying to get a place that we could do a little concert,
Mhm.
and raise some money. And 27 churches turned us down,
Yeah.
but every gin joint and honky tonk in the metro area said yes to us.
Yeah.
Which now it seems ironic.
Yeah.
It wasn't funny then, but the north side said, well, we can't do that exactly, but this is what we can do,
Yeah.
and that's what started us on our path. But God's getting
He's
back
big.
to he's big. Tom
Yeah.
Mullins was right. I mean, God's big. I don't know what
Yeah.
else to say.
Les,
So I hope that was
no,
enough.
no, yeah. I'm processing what you said, and there's a lot in that. And I will tell you that I believe God cleaned Jeff's plate because Jeff would never clean his plate himself.
I agree with that 100%.
And at the time to have to move out of the breakwater,
Mhm.
that wasn't Jeff's plan.
Right? No.
You would have probably done anything you could to stay there.
Yep.
And so God had to clean your plate
Yep.
because you wouldn't have done it yourself.
Right.
But also, God being able to see the end from the beginning where he is,
Right.
he knew that these grandkids,
Yeah.
not only did he need to clean your plate, but he needed to clean your schedule.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
that you would be able to get to experience every bit of this blessing
Yep.
that is these grandkids.
Yep.
And what a wonderful blessing that is. And I think of ministry. I tell my wife this all the time, and I tell the church this. I don't ever see. It's a life. It's a calling. It's a lifestyle. It's what I will do forever.
Yeah.
Now, along the way, ministry changes because people change. The message stays the same.
Yeah.
But I like to think of ministry as I'm an 80s nerd and I'm a space nerd, but I like to think of it as the old space shuttle.
Okay.
And starts out big. And all along the way, as the altitude climbs and you get closer to the destination, things begin to fall off.
Yep. Good analogy.
And there's some things in life and there's some things in ministry that are only designed by God to carry you so far.
Mhm.
And then they're not needed anymore. So they're released.
Right.
And then the next thing will carry you a little further. And when that's not needed anymore, it's released. I think that it's possible, Jeff, that Clean Socks Hope carried you as far as it was going to carry you.
I agree.
And God released it.
Yeah.
8th Street Pizza at the Breakwater and other locations that
Yeah.
you had been in carried you so far.
Yep.
God released those.
Mhm.
And now you're in a place where it's just you,
Mhm.
Shelly,
Yeah.
your grandkids,
Yeah. Yep.
and you've never been happier.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that was, the what all along, we don't ever, we don't have the forethought or the sight to see
Yeah.
it, but God, you're right. God has looked way down the road. And, I mean, I'm young enough, even though I'm old, I'm young enough to see these kids graduate.
Yeah.
And all the important things, and rarely has there been an event that we haven't been a part of yet. And so that's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And heck, we had their 4th birthday party was on a Saturday, and we just closed the restaurant and just said, like, Jess, we're doing a thing.
Out to party.
Yeah. I'm out partying
Yeah.
with 4-year-olds,
Boy,
But
the times have changed. haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, how
Yeah.
cool is that?
Yeah.
And not a worry in the world because we've got a few $100s of bills that we'll have to pay, and the suppliers are usually paid,
Yeah.
Immediately. So there's no, and we were talking about this. You're speaking of the space race and stuff. Shelley and I are both huge mid-century modern fans, so that would be the original space race.
Right.
George Jetsons and all that stuff. So we went to our annual. We go every year to the Mid-Century Modern Show in Cincinnati, and we were talking about that. We love that. On the way up, we were talking about all kinds of stuff, but that was it. How fun it is to just not have all this worry and burden and stuff, of I mean, I just think what a blessing that was
Yeah.
for God to just say, okay, you've done okay here. Now let's get this off your back for now.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was having chest pains and the whole deal. I mean, everything you can think of, I was going.
Stress, man.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
And it was just not good, and um, just having that part of your life back is
Huge blessing.
huge blessing and a miracle in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, did it happen the way I would want it to happen? Not necessarily, but
But it
it's
happened.
okay.
But it happened the right way.
Yeah, it did.
In
Yeah.
His way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So-
Jeff. So real quick, and we'll wrap this up tonight. Let me ask you, if someone watching online tonight or someone listening to this, they say, you know what, I want to support Jeff. I want to support what he's doing. Tell us again where we can find you. Tell us where we can get a pizza, and tell us how we can support you in
Okay.
that way.
Well, it's pretty easy. It's Donham Day Brewery is 3211 Grantline Road, number 3,
Okay.
in New Albany, 47150. And the telephone number there, if I can remember, is 812-590-2478.
Okay.
And that's all you have to do.
We
Come and
we
order.
can call that number and
Yep.
place an order for a pizza.
Yes, you can call and place an order. Online, we're at AithStreetPizza.net. And it actually will say 8th Day Pizza and 8th Street Pizza combined. We've been doing a little marketing plan to get people used to that name.
Yeah.
But we
A
do
little transition time.
Yeah, we do carry out and delivery, and you can eat there in the pub. Yeah. So if you're into craft beer, that kind of stuff, they have it, but they also have soft drinks and
Yeah.
water and that kind of stuff. So
Now with it being a brewery and pub style, are the children allowed?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. There's obviously children can't sit at the bar
Right,
like
right,
any
correct,
place,
yeah.
but I think we can seat about 30 folks in the restaurant proper.
Okay.
And then he's got a garage door, so we can push it outside if we need to.
Good
But we've had they had a chili cook-off on Sunday. We're closed, by the way, on Sunday and Monday. That's a little bit of a carryover from the other place.
Yeah.
But and we just do evening. We just do dinner 3 to 9 or 3 to 10, depending on the day.
Okay.
But we've had as many as if the fire inspectors listening to this, don't listen, but we've probably had 150 people in there for some of our charity events.
Yeah.
And now they weren't all in the weren't all in there, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But
Tickets in the mail.
yeah. yeah. I'll be there and a fire truck will be sitting outside like, oh crap, they must have listened to this.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we get the fire marshal out of New Albany, but if we do,
Yeah.
maybe he'll show you some grace.
Yeah. I think he just retired, so hopefully the new guy wouldn't.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jeff, as always, man, it's great to sit down and have a conversation with you. And
Thank you.
thank you so much for your yes, and thank you for being here tonight to just share a little bit of your life and what's going on, and telling us a little bit about this big God.
Yeah.
And
Amen to that.
And
Yeah, we got Tom Mullins, the old he was a youth pastor at one of the local churches that we ran into along our journey,
Yeah.
And that was his favorite saying, and maybe still is.
Yeah.
Yeah. God is big.
God is big. Well, that's your takeaway for tonight, and for everyone watching. God is big, and you don't limit him.
No.
Yeah. Well, again, Jeff, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you to your wife for allowing us to have you for a while and take you away from home this evening so you could be here. And for everyone watching online, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for listening. And Jeff, I hope you'll come back and see us again soon.
I'd love to.
All
I'd love
right.
to. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, you guys have a blessed week and a wonderful evening. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.